Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are here for another read this month. We are going to introduce The Games Gods Play to you guys today, which we are very excited about. It's in a genre that we don't read very often, so this should be a fun experience for us to kind of figure out what we like and don't like about the book. But before we get to that, I do want to just put out some feelers into the universe to let you guys know that this is the third of 4 books that we will be doing in our first season, which is genre blends. And we will be moving on to translated works in May. So if you guys are interested in putting in your holds early, we will have all of the books that we've chosen for that season in the description, as well as on our Instagram page. Before we actually get to introducing The Games Gods Play to you guys, we do want to do our bookish bite of the week. And this week, my question for you, Leandra, is how often and what makes you read out of your comfort zone?
Ooh, I think first and foremost, we need to address what would be out of my comfort zone. I think that the genres that are most out of my comfort zone are romance and thriller. Fantasy, I would argue at this point, I feel pretty confident in. It's just like high and epic fantasy that I have the least amount of experience, and also length. I guess the longer the book, the less experience I likely have with it, because I am known as someone who kind of prefers maybe like 300 pages or less. That's kind of my sweet spot. So the question is how often do I get out of my comfort zone? And, how would I do that? Well, I think I am more willing to try a genre outside of my comfort zone than a length outside of my comfort zone. Maybe just because it's easier, right? I can pick up, a 300-page romance and just quickly DNF it, or whatever the case is, or read through it quickly. Whereas if I'm picking up a 500, 600, 700-page book, it's intimidating. I just, of course, it's in my mind. I'm telling myself I'll be dedicating more time to something that may not have a payoff, when obviously I could just DNF the book. Like, I could literally read a 300-page thriller, DNF at 50 pages, or I could read like a 700-page sci-fi, DNF at 50 pages. It's literally the same thing, but I don't know why. I that's how I would answer that question. Is I find it easier to try things outside of my comfort zone that are shorter reads. Also, audio. I am more willing to try a book outside of my comfort zone if I have access to the audio, because I just find it more palatable, and it'll be easier for me to feel as though I'm not, quote unquote, wasting my time as well, versus like sitting down with a physical book and just, yeah, it feels like I'm wasting my time a little bit potentially. How about you?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up format because I was thinking the same thing as you were talking that I definitely I so to jump back to identifying what is out of my comfort zone, I would say that romance is definitely something that's out of my comfort zone, but also classic literature, literary fiction. Those would probably be the genres that I don't gravitate towards, and I would be more comfortable reading out of my comfort zone with an audiobook. I love a chunky read, as we know, and so that wouldn't necessarily deter me, but short story collections I do avoid because I
Ooh. Mhm.
struggle with short stories. Now, novellas, I tend to be okay with. Like, I'll try a novella if it's not something that I'm super interested in because of how short the page count is, and I don't feel like I've spent, a ton of time with something that I might not love. But for whatever reason, I don't extend that to short story collections because I just haven't had very, very good luck with the ones that I've picked up, which I need to change. I would like to change that in this upcoming year. That I would like to pick up more and kind of figure out where in short stories do I agree and disagree or like and dislike those types of stories. So I'm going to start with some mystery short stories. That's where I'm going to go. As far as like how often, I actually created a challenge for myself this year because I don't get out of my comfort zone very often. I do really like to stay within my line of comfort. It is 100% something that I have to push myself to do. And I almost have to plan for it. It's not something that I will do like off the cuff. I have to have like in mind, okay, this month I want to read this book that I'm not super comfortable with. And usually I will spread them out between several books that I know are more my jam.
Honestly, I think that when we think about the type of readers that we are, it makes sense that length would be opposite as far as my
Yeah.
comfort zone being shorter, your comfort zone being bigger. Obviously, fantasy is known for having really large books. Meanwhile, mysteries, they're tried and true. The, mass market 50-cent books, £1 books back in the day were, 200 to 250 pages. You were meant to be able to just kind of get in, get out. And of course, short stories, with newspapers, a lot of times
Yeah.
these short stories were published in newspapers, magazines, specifically for mystery genre. And also my background in creative writing, I often had to study a lot of short stories. It was far easier in a classroom for us all to read a short story and dissect it rather than a novel. So interesting. It totally makes sense. But speaking of, obviously, this was a very topical bookish bite because we are out of our comfort zone when it comes to this romantasy title. I would argue that it's actually out of our comfort zone in multiple ways. So not only because it's a genre blend that neither of us have much experience in and not much positive experiences in. We promise people aren't saying that we're automatically not going to like this book, and we really have only scratched the surface. We've had a couple tries with the romantasy genre, and some have been fine, some haven't, and so maybe it's more so that we will eventually have to learn what we like in this genre blend, and we'll see what the games gods play can actually help us learn about ourselves as readers.
Speaking of games God's play, I hear that you have an introduction for us. Let's read the synopsis.
I do. A synopsis indeed. So, grabbing out my handy dandy e-reader, here goes nothing. I have never been favored by the gods, far from it, thanks to Zeus. Living as a cursed office clerk for the Order of Thieves, I just keep my head down and hope the capricious beings who rule from Olympus won't notice me. Not an easy feat, given San Francisco is Zeus's patron city, but I make do. I survive. Until the night I tangle with a different god, the worst god, Hades. For the first time ever, the ruthless, mercurial king of the underworld has entered the crucible, the deadly contest the gods hold to determine a new ruler to sit on the throne of Olympus. But instead of fighting their own battles, the gods name mortals to compete in their stead. So, why in the underworld did Hades choose me, a sarcastic nobody with a curse on her shoulders, as his champion? And why does my heart trip every time he says I'm his? I don't know if I'm a pawn, bait, or something else entirely to this dangerously tempting God. How can I, when he has more secrets than stars in the sky? Because Hades is playing by his own rules, and death will win at any cost. What are our thoughts?
Interesting. I guess my first thoughts are I didn't realize that it was set in like a modern society. So that will be interesting to see the mix between this ancient lore versus, a more modern world. I don't, which I should have by the title. I did not realize that this had like a competition, trials, like game situation in it, which I mean, it makes sense with the title, but I didn't think about what that implied. I assumed that it was going to be gods playing with human lives, which I know that it is that, but that was kind of my assumption of what we were going to get going into the book. And it sounds more like they're using gods or they're using humans to win a trial, which is interesting.
Yeah, they're using humans to play for them instead
Yeah.
of, rather than the gods battling each other. And I'm sure that once we get into it, it's going to be this explanation where at some point the gods realized, why are we fighting amongst ourselves? Let's just use the humans and we can relax. I'm sure that that's probably going to be the explanation for why they're using mortals to be their pawns. And I knew that there would be trials only because we have friends on the internet who have also read this book, and I, had heard little whispers of what to expect. I agree. I didn't expect our main character to be an office clerk. It seems that she has a curse on her, which, obviously will play on, her past, some secrets, maybe the conflict that will eventually happen between her and Hades not being able to trust each other, the classic romantic things that go on. But I wasn't expecting the urban setting, even though we also shouldn't be surprised because with this being a modern Greek reimagining, retelling, especially with Hades involved, I can list a few on my fingers where that's the case. There's this really popular graphic novel series that was on Webtoons. It still is, but they're being published traditionally. Lore Olympus. That one treats Hades as like a CEO, and his company is, based in the underworld, and obviously there's a love interest with Persephone. Then we also have, I believe it's called Neon Gods by Katie
Yes.
Roberts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another series that is set in this very urban city setting. And yeah, so I guess it makes sense when you think about it. But is our main character Persephone? I don't think we got a name.
Oh, I don't think we got a name either.
Do
But, I
you
mean, I
want to
guess
make a
that would
bet?
just be
do,
the
you, do you think it is?
that would be my guess, is that that's who she's supposed to be a reimagining of. I do know, like, you listed a couple, but Hades and Persephone retellings have kind of had a reemergence in the book whatever universe. I recently was just walking through my library and saw one. It was called In the Garden of Monsters, and it was a I don't know if it's a 2025 release or a 2024 release, but it's fairly new. And I picked it up because I liked the cover, just to find out that it was a Hades and Persephone retelling. So they are definitely everywhere. So I'm not surprised that those are the two gods. Or the two likenesses that we are looking at. So it'll be interesting. What are your thoughts on retellings in general?
Ooh, I used to think I really liked them, and there are quite a few that I enjoy. For instance, Lore Olympus, I have been eating up that graphic novel series. Every time a new one comes out, I end up borrowing it from the library and read it and really enjoy it. And I definitely have some retellings on my shelves, but I will argue that for the most part, they're all retellings that are either fairy tales, so certain type of like I guess like classic legends and that are often more often than not Grimm's fairy tales, or they're reimaginings, retellings of other literary characters. So I actually would argue that retellings that I'm most familiar with personally are literary retellings. So for instance, a Sherlockian reimagining, or maybe, we're following some of Jane Austen's main characters, or again, like following Red Riding Hood and others from the Grimm's fairy tales. I don't think I very often delve into mythology retellings beyond the kind of hype books that I'll pick up and try, including Lore Olympus. I will say that I have also I think I'll watch reimaginings and retellings actually a little bit. Like there's this YouTube series. It's like a very short sketch series by this artist who I think he's French. It's called God's School, and it follows the Greek gods. It takes him a really long time, obviously, to publish them because he's like a one man show. But yeah, I think I don't know why I just don't gravitate towards the traditional Greek reimaginings. What about you?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I'm kind of on the same line with you. I There have been a couple Greek retellings that I've read that I've enjoyed, but more often than not, I find myself a little bored or a little weirded out by Greek retellings because mythology can be a little odd at times. And,
Mm.
authors, rightly so, will use source material and they will bring in kind of different stories. The main one that's coming to my mind is not a Greek retelling, but it's The Witch's Heart, which is Norse mythology. And it was the story of Loki, or Loki was one of the characters in it. And there are a lot of really odd things that happen that I was not aware of, and so reading those it wasn't a modern retelling by any means, but reading it in a modern style was very weird and almost, shocking at times, and so I do tend to shy away from mythology retellings. Fairy tale retellings, I'm all for. Frankenstein, I've read so many numerous retellings of Frankenstein, and so I am a little bit more comfortable with those. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just because I haven't found like my niche within mythology retellings, or if it's just because the source material is a little out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it is even if you haven't read certain classics, for instance, certain original fairy tale stories, we're often really familiar with the bare bones of,
Yeah,
these characters. And part of me always wonders how much I'm missing when I read specifically like a mythology reimagining. It doesn't really matter what type of mythology it is, because I just know for a fact I really don't know anything about it beyond, Hercules. Like that is my source material when it comes to that. And I remember trying, what is it called? Song for Achilles. I got maybe 50 pages into that book and I felt as though I wasn't in on something. I'm like, you know what? I know for a fact that there are so many key references that are probably coming out that people who love mythology will be eating up, and I'll just feel like I'm missing out on the not inside joke, but and then I just can't. And it's not that it's FOMO. I just feel like I'm not getting everything I could out of this book,
yeah.
and I'm not connected to it because I don't know the backstory, so I don't immediately care about these characters. So I'm partly, there's going to be some worry about that, but at the same time, I would argue romances that are Greek mythology reimaginings or like reimaginings usually aren't that hard pressed to throw in, the really like minute details from the stories.
That's true. So that will be a little bit of a boon for this book, hopefully, that it will take it out of the, I guess, studious mode of mythology retellings. We're going to have something that maybe is a little bit more lighthearted, but there's only one way for us to find out, and that is for us to pick up the book and read. So, what are we going to be reading
Indeed.
this week?
Well, so for this book, it's quite long. So if you're with us on this journey, just keep that in mind, especially if you have the audiobook. It's going to be approximately 6 to 7 hours worth of listening. If you've got the physical copy, don't worry. We've divided it pretty nicely into parts. And so when it comes to the first section, our first third for next Friday, we're going to have parts 1 through 3 finished. So read all the way to the end of part 3. As soon as you get to that beginning of part 4, stop or keep reading. We're just going to stop. So if you want to stick with us, then please feel free to do so. But until then, happy reading. Hopefully, we all end up having a lot to think about and enjoy as we're reading this book. And we'll be seeing you guys around the internet very soon. Okay. Bye, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra _ the TBR0. How about you, Danni?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.